Hello students, welcome to the POL.SCIENCE of class 12 arts, and today we'll discuss about the topic India and globalization from the chapter Globalization. So previously we studied about the concept of globalization. After that we also discussed about the causes of globalization. Then we discussed about political consequences of globalization, economic consequences of globalization, and cultural consequences of globalization. So today we will start discussing about Indian globalization. What is the impact of globalization related to our country? So let us proceed then. So the first point related to Indian globalization is globalization has occurred in earlier periods in history in different parts of the world. Flows pertaining to the movement of capital, commodities, ideas and people go back several centuries in Indian history. That means what? In earlier periods only, in different parts of the world, globalization has taken place. Somewhere globalization is there till from the very beginning, and at some places the process of globalization has started lately. So globalization as a result is the flow of capital, commodities, ideas and people, as we know, and that is been going on through several centuries in Indian history. So during the colonial period, as a consequence of Britain's imperial ambitions, India became an exporter of the primary goods and raw materials and a consumer of finished goods. So if we go back to that time when we were actually being ruled by the British, and during the colonial period only, the British came after the Portuguese and the East India Company. After that, the British started ruling us. So at that time, India became what? An exporter. That means it was exporting primary goods also and many raw materials, and a consumer of finished good also. So all these products related to primary goods, then raw materials and finished goods was being exported by India to the British, that means to England. After independence, because of this experience with the British, we decided to make things ourselves rather than relying on others. That means, so as a result, after getting independence from the British rule in 1947, the Indians understood that rather than exporting things to the outer countries, which can be in the form of goods, raw materials and consumer goods, rather than exporting them, the Indians understood that they should make things in their own country, which will give them a huge profit rather than exporting. Because during the British time also, what was the consequences? The British would take the raw materials at suppose 2 rupees, and after making many things through that raw materials, they will indirectly again sell to us that goods which they have purchased in rupees 2. They will sold us at about 5 or 6 times the profit. That can be more than 10 or 12 per goods. So the experience which the Indians had before, that their own material was being sold to them at higher rate. So this was the experience that was with the Indians. So the Indians decided not to export any raw materials to the outer countries. Rather than, what they will do, they will try to manufacture it in their own country, which will give them a good profit. So we also decided not to allow others to export to us, so that our own producers could learn to make things. So after independence, the Indians decided two things, that they will not export also and they will not import also. That means they will not sell any products of our own country to the other country, and apart from that, they will not purchase anything from the outside countries. So why was this done? Because they were thinking that the Indians should actually learn to make things. Clear? So for this only, the Indians decided that they will not export anything and neither they will import anything. So in 1991, responding to a financial crisis and to desire for higher rates of economic growth, India embarked on a program of economic reforms that has sought increasingly to deregulate various sectors including trade and foreign investment. And after till 1990, the Indians carried on with the same thought process of not exporting also, not importing also. But in the year 1991, there was a financial crisis in our country, and due to that financial crisis, our GDP was to a very low. So at that time, the Indian government decided to open or deregulate all these restrictions, whatever trade restrictions were there, like they had restricted export also and import also. They have lifted the restrictions, and due to that lifting of restrictions of export and import, our country entered into the era of globalization. And this era of globalization was opened related to free trade area also and foreign investment also. Then only the foreign companies started investing in our country. Like all the foreign companies that are here, so these are all here by the foreign direct investment, FDI. That means all the foreign companies can invest in our own country and can do trade with us. This was done as a result of lifting all the restrictions on export and import, and this started in the year 1991. Remember this date. Clear? After this comes resistance to globalization. That means the critics, demerits or disadvantages. So the critics of globalization make a variety of arguments. Those on the left argue that contemporary globalization represents a particular phase of global capitalism that makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. So number one disadvantage or the critical analysis to globalization is that those who do not support globalization says that due to the process of globalization, rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poorer. This is number one analysis. Number two, politically, critics of globalization also fear the weakening of state. Economically, they want a return to self-reliance and protectionism, at least in certain areas of economy. Culturally, they are worried that traditional culture will be harmed and people will lose their age-old values and ways. So number one analysis was that the rich people will become more richer and the poor will become more poorer. And number two is that the critical analysis about globalization is that will affect our tradition and culture. And the critics related to globalization says that the coming of globalization can actually hamper both our age-old traditions and culture. Number three, anti-globalization movements to participate in the global networks, allying with those who feel like them in other countries. So apart from that, they also feel that anti-globalization movements can also be there, because allying with those who feel like them in other countries also. So number one is that the rich people will become richer and the poor will become poorer. Number two is that it can hamper our tradition and culture, which is age old. And number three is anti-globalization movements also participate in global networks. That means in many places these anti-globalization movements were carried on. Number four, in 1999 at the World Trade Organization ministerial meeting, there were widespread protests in Seattle alleging unfair trading practices by the economically powerful states. It was argued that the interests of the developing world were not given sufficient importance in the evolving global economic system. And number four, according to the critics, those who are not in favor of globalization, says that during the meeting of World Trade Organization, in its ministerial meeting, all those dominance or the decisions are taken by the powerful world, those who are already developed, like the United States of America, Russia, and so on. So it is thought and it is believed that all the important decisions related to the globalization process is taken by them, And developing countries like the third world countries related to the smaller countries of Asia and Africa, their decisions are not at all given importance. So which can actually hamper, because the globalization process should have equal saying to the to all the countries. That means all the countries in the world having related to globalization should have an equal say, but it is widely believed that the globalization process is actually all the important decisions are taken by the powerful developed countries and not by the developing countries. And number 5 is the World Social Forum is another global platform which brings together a wide coalition composed of human rights activists, environmentalists, labor, youth and women activists opposed to neoliberal globalization. So number 5th point is that the World Social Forum is there, under which many organizations are there, starting from human rights activists are there, environmentalists are there, labor are there, youth are there, and women factions are also there. And all these organizations togetherly are actually opposing the globalization process. The human rights activists also, the environmentalists also, the labor also, the youth and women faction also. So these are all the critics of globalization who believes that this globalization process is very much dangerous, and they believe it in important 5 points that are, first of all, they believe that it will make the rich richer and poor poorer. Number 2, they believe that it can hamper the tradition and culture which is lifelong. Then they believe that anti-globalization process movement has taken place in many countries. And number 4, they believe that during the WTO meeting in the year 1999, all the important decisions were taken by the powerful developed states, and the interest of the developing country were not at all given the importance. And number 5, the critics of globalization believes that there is a World Social Forum which is known as WSF, and under these forums many organizations are there which consist of human rights activists, environmentalists, labor, youth and women. They single-handedly they joined hands to protest globalization. Clear? So with this I will wind up today's topic related to the chapter globalization. And today we understood about Indian globalization and resistance to globalization. So please make a note down of both these points and go through once each of the points. So winding up here only. Thank you.